In this video, I'll be sharing with you some brand new information from one of Darren Nicholls' earliest police interviews. Now, Darren Nicholls was the alleged getaway driver the night that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were killed. This video will examine the relationship between Darren Nicholls and the corrupt Essex police officer DC Wolfgang Bird and pose the question, was Darren Nicholls a police informant prior to their murders? Take a listen to the following. This interview is being tape recorded. The time is 16:44 hours on Wednesday the 15th of May 1996 and it's being tape recorded at Chelmsford Police Station. I'm investigating the offence of possession with intent to supply a controlled drug, and a record of this interview will be made and may be given in evidence if you're brought to trial. Do you understand that, Darren? Yes, I do. I'm Michael Joseph Brown, Detective Constable 744 of the Essex Police, stationed at Headquarters Major Investigations, and my colleague is DC Winston, DC 1477, Chris Winston of the Essex Police. And we are currently speaking to Darren. Would you introduce yourself please for the tape? Darren Nicholls of 15 Bailey Bridge Road, Braintree, Essex. My date of birth is the 18th of the 4th, 65. Fine, thank you. We've obviously been talking about DC Bird. Would you please carry on and tell me anything else that you know of his association? We've been talking about cars. You had touched on the fact that you've been telling DC Bird that you had some involvement with Michael Steele and you had some knowledge of the importation of drugs into the country, and that you would now go on to explain when you had this information, what you explained and who to. Oh, at that time, DC Bird wasn't particularly bothered about knowing where it was landed, sort of thing. Right. He did ask me, where did they keep it? Where was it stored once it was landed? You know, where did it go? And I said, well, the times that I've received any drugs, I've gone round and I've said, look, I'll have some drugs. He's always took me to his mum's bungalow, which is 2 Allen Way, Point Clear, which is about 100 yards from where they land it. So it's a pretty convenient little spot. And he's always got it out of his mum's garage like. But he's since sold that house, but he sold it to Paul Gwinnett, so that's handy. Did you ever introduce Wolfie to anybody, Darren? No, I didn't want to introduce him to anyone at all. No, not at all. The only person that ever met Wolfie was Colin Bridge. And that was because around my governor's house I'm doing a loft conversion. And Wolfie wanted to talk to me one day. He knew that I was working at my governor's house. And it was sort of on his way to work. He'd call in and Colin had met him, basically he'd just come and say hello to Colin and then say, can I have a word? And drag me outside and talk to me and that. Okay, so let's just cut in here very briefly because we need to remember what Darren Nicholls has just stated there. He's asked a question, have you introduced DC Bird to anybody else? He says, no, not at all. No, I wouldn't want to. He's very, very adamant, isn't he? That he hasn't introduced DC Bird to anybody else. Now, there's a connection here. There is definitely a connection here between Colin Bridge and DC Bird. These individuals know each other. They've seen each other. They've spent time in each other's company. That's an admission made in this particular police interview conducted with Darren Nicholls. Those two most definitely have a connection. But remember what Darren Nicholls has stated here. He personally hasn't introduced DC Bird to anybody else. The reason why that's so important will become apparent as we move forward. Let's continue. Did you ever discuss with DC Bird anything about the Rettendon murders that we've spoken to you about? I had a conversation with him about it. The conversation happened in his conservatory at his house, and to let you know, it's a white conservatory and it's got a black marble floor, just so you know that that's his home. I've also got his house number as well. It's 01371 874 714, and I was talking to him in his conservatory and he said the police, again, he's telling me, the police have got an interest in you, Darren. I don't know why, he said. I think it's because through association you knew Pat Tate. This is what he was telling me. He said, is this so? And I said, yeah, well, I did know him, but I haven't actually seen him for a long time since he was shot. Then I went through the outline story and he said, what do you think happened? And I gave him some broad details of my opinion of what I believed happened. I basically went through this from a third party point of view. I didn't say I knew who done it. I just went through what I knew. Like, I knew that Pat Tate had decided not to pay back I think it's the Mullocks. I think that Pat had decided not to pay him back because he was a big enough man to get away with it. You know, he said that, like, he couldn't pay him back because Mick still hadn't given him the money, if you see. And then I said, then the basic thing was that the Mullocks, this is something I haven't actually said to you, the Mullocks wanted to threaten Mick Steele, that there was then conversations, well, one of yous two's got my money, and we want it or else. And then Pat piped up, he said, he's got it, I'll prove it to you. If I don't, I'll kill him. And this is what Pat's wife's rung up and told Mick, you know? And that's basically what I told DC Bird. And I said that after that, I said, I didn't actually know who killed him. I said, because it could have been the Mullocks. And I said, I know from conversations, which I learnt later, that one lives in Brentwood and one supposedly lives in Romford. Okay, so let's cut in here very briefly. Now, Darren Nicholls, in his police interview here, starts talking about the Mullock brothers. Yeah, well, you know, the Mullock brothers, they were owed money by Pat Tate. That's the motive for the murders. That's why Michael Steele had to kill them. He brings in the Mullock brothers. Now, think about it this way. At this point in time, during Darren Nicholls' interview, it's imperative that he tells the truth. He needs to provide the actual motive for why Michael Steele has killed Pat Tate. Yet Darren Nicholls doesn't know the motive. He's got it completely wrong. Ask yourselves, bearing in mind, for quite some time now, I've suggested that Wombs, Steele and Nicholls, they had some kind of idea what was going on. They maybe had some involvement in getting Tucker, Tate and Rolfe down the lane, but they're on the outside, in my opinion. And is that reflected in what Darren Nicholls states here? That he doesn't actually know the true motive for why Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were killed. Bearing in mind, he's supposed to be the getaway driver. He's supposed to be the person who pulls up, Jack gets into the car, Mick gets into the car, they're covered in blood, they're laughing and joking, pats the grass, they won't mess with us again, there's discussion as to why it happened. Yet Darren Nicholls in this police interview hasn't got a clue. Okay, so now let's continue and be forewarned that the next part includes some epic Darren Nicholls waffle. So stick with this, we'll get through this together. Just stay with me because, as I say, the last part is where we need to make the connection. But it's important that I read this in its entirety to give you the context of this particular police interview. DC Brown says, do you remember when that was, Darren? When? No, I don't remember when it was. It's obviously quite a while before he went to Spain on his holiday to get his mortgage or whatever. It was before he tried to sell any cars for me or anything like that. It was when he was being my best friend. It was probably just after I told him about that 50 key. It was actually. It was just after. Because I remember him saying, I've got to come up with a bloody good excuse. How comes I knew there was 50 key there? And my informant couldn't tell me who had put it there? How did they know it was there, if you see my point of view? He said, I'll have to come up with a good excuse. Because I can't just say, oh, a little bird told me. And they said, well, the little bird must know who put it there. And he said, my problem is, I can't say, well, you put it there. You told me you put it there. So I said, oh, that was like some of it. Must be quite close to the time when I got the money and things. You know, and because he said to me, oh, the police are very interested in you. Still, what could it be about? And then he said to me, is it about this Rettendon thing? And I said, oh. And the other thing I did say to him was that Ian Spindler had mouthed off that he was lucky to be alive because he was supposed to be at the deal that obviously went wrong and ended up resulting in the death of, like, the 3 people. So I said to him, you know, in the sort of way, oh, why don't you speak to Ian Spindler? Because if he was meant to be at the deal, there's a good chance he'd know why why it was meant to be, why this deal was going on. So I'm trying my hardest to work around the sort of, you know, don't know too much really, but I'm trying to be helpful. And then the next day he rang me up and said, no, it's nothing to do with that. Don't know what it was, he said, didn't bother. He was going to come and see you. And then in my mind I'm thinking, he's winding me up. Like he's telling me these things, like, oh, the police want to see you. Getting me to say something and then saying, not really. And then saying, I've helped you out. You helped me out, if you see what I mean. I thought, he's playing with me like. And I thought, fucking hell, like, you know, he's sort of basically playing with me. And then after that, he said, forget all that, he said, I'll write it in my notebook. It actually was a blue notebook, like. And he said, I've ripped the pages out, I've ripped them up, right? Because what I told him was enough from the information that I knew, you know. How did I know so much about this? Like, what had gone wrong and all that. And that was totally forgot about. Like he said, he just forgot about it. He wasn't interested. And then we had the conversation. I had a conversation with him as well, saying, look, I actually can't bring myself to... Because he said to me in conversation, this is very recent, because I said to him, Mick's bought my Jag. I said, he'll probably use it because it's a nice car to take abroad. Send money abroad to buy drugs. And he went to me, yeah, blimey, you got 2 keys? I said, no, I've only got one. I'll give it to him. Fucking shame, he said. If we could just get the boat, or get the car on the boat, use the spare key, nick the money out of the car, lock the car, get off the ferry and come home like, no one would be any the wiser. And I said to him, someone will die for doing something like that. I said, you thought of, you know, and he went, who cares? I mean, fucking hell, we've got the money. They haven't. And I went, well, yeah. And he said, see if you can get another key sort of thing. Okay, so let's just cut in here very briefly. Now, again, apologies for the epic Darren Nicholls waffle there, but let's just try and break down exactly what's taking place during this stage of the police interview. Now, Darren Nicholls is basically saying, look, I know that a Jag's going abroad. It's going to have £150,000 on it. And DC Bird says, well, why don't you get 2 keys cut? Why don't you get a key cut so there's 2 keys? When Steele leaves the vehicle and goes up on deck, I'll come along with the spare key and make off with the car. Now, on the face of it, it appears, you know, a little bit fanciful, almost like a conversation between 2 people where they're saying, oh, yeah, well, we could do this, we could do that. But as we go further forward with this police interview, you'll understand that DC Bird wasn't just handing out the odd £50 or £100 for a bit of information in order to further his own career. This guy was actively robbing criminals. He was actively robbing other drug dealers. Goes a little bit deeper, goes a little bit further than just some sort of pie-in-the-sky idea regarding this Jaguar. So bear that in mind as we continue and take a listen to the following. We now move on to the arrest of Darren Nicholls. DC Brown says, can I just go back to something that was said last night, Darren, please? You said that you spoke very briefly about DC Bird. Would you just go over again what you said last night about the phone conversation? Do you remember that you told us that you had a phone conversation with Mickey Steele when just at the time that you were stopped? Yeah, alright, yeah. Would you just run over that again for me, please? Yeah, I'd been over there and picked up some drugs. I met up with Colin. Met Colin up the road and like put them in the transit and go on Cole, off you go. And when I'm driving away, I'm about, well, you can probably check Mick's phone record as well as mine. He rung me and said, Darren, have you picked your Land Rover up this morning? I said, yeah. He said, was there anything in it? I said, no, it was empty. A gallon of oil? I said, why? I said, what's your problem? Nothing, he said, and hung up. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, there's no way he'd ring me up because he'd lost a spanner, you know? So about within a couple of minutes, I rung him back and said, what have you lost? He said, have a guess what I've lost. I've lost drugs. He said, they're not here. He said, I'm just rechecking it. I said, oh, right. And then I hung up, you know. What could I say? I thought, fucking hell, I don't want him thinking I've stole drugs off him. Shit, like, you know. Especially as I've gone over there and got my Land Rover. That would be like the end of my life as far as I was concerned if he thought I'd stolen something off him. And then shortly afterwards, you pulled me up and got me. Well, not you in particular, but you pulled me up and arrested me. So was there any intimation, Darren, about how much that had gone or exactly what that was? No, I just took it just sat in my mind, and then during interview it was mentioned to me that 2 policemen. See, because when I was first arrested, my first thought was, why isn't DC Bird here? Like, getting me out of trouble, you know? He's given me the okay to do this. Why isn't he here saying, no, leave him alone. He can go. Off you go. Don't worry about this. And I'm thinking to myself, why isn't this happening? And then I'm thinking, I actually said to one of the custody sergeants or an inspector, is there any chance of being interviewed by a particular officer? And they said, we'll pass on the message. I don't know if you got it. Yes, it's actually recorded on your custody sheet, Darren. Because I'm thinking to myself, you know, this policeman's told me it's okay. Just carry on. Everything's fine. Sweet. You can do it. It's okay, Dal. The Essex police know you're doing it. Carry on. And I'm thinking in my mind, fucking hell. And then when I heard there's a policeman being arrested, I just knew it was him. I knew that you must have DC Bird. And then it also clicked to me what Mick was ringing me up about, saying, Darren, I've lost some drugs. I just knew in my mind, knowing that he knew where they were. He's basically gone over there, knowing where the drugs were going to be left. You know, this is only in my mind. And I thought to myself, he's gone over there and stole them. He's actually like, I thought, well, they come in 20 kilo parcels, yeah? They come in like little cubes. I've seen a couple of them. They come in little cubes and I'm thinking, fucking hell, he's nicked them. He's nicked the drugs. Shit, I'm dead. He's nicked some drugs. It was going through my mind. Okay, so let's cut in here and break down what we've just heard in that particular part of the police interview. Now, for me, this is all about levels. How far is DC Bird actually willing to go? Because we've been told, haven't we, or we've heard already, yeah, you know, get the second key cut for the Jag, we'll make off with Steele's 150,000, no problem at all. And now we have a very high possibility here of DC Bird stealing Michael Steele's drugs. Again, it's all based on levels. This isn't some low-level detective just taking the odd backhander. This guy knew very well where Michael Steele was storing his product. Michael Steele rings up on the day of their arrest. Darren, where's the drugs? Where's the drugs? Darren, in his mind, is thinking, oh no, he's gone over there and stole his drugs. I mean, think about this. How many people would have known where Michael Steele was storing that product? Probably not that many. And yet Darren Nicholls was telling DC Bird, yeah, Steele brings it in at this time, he stores it here, he stores it there, then we've moved it over to here. DC Bird during this time period is very well aware of where those drugs were being stored. And, you know, is it just a mere coincidence that on the day that they're arrested, a large consignment or a large part of that consignment has vanished? The first thought that Darren Nicholls has is, it's DC Bird. He's gone over there. He's gone over there and stolen the drugs. I'm dead. Think about that. Again, it's all about levels. What was this DC Bird prepared to actually do? Was he some low-level individual who was dipping his fingers in multiple pies? Or was this individual actually capable of robbing other criminals, other dealers? Let's continue. It was when I was locked up. I just knew. I knew he'd been over there. I'll tell you. I don't say you know, but I'm telling you that he's gone over there. In my mind, that's what's happened. He's gone over there. He's ripped him off of them drugs because I told him they were there. I mean, I didn't tell him they were there. I told him they were going to be there, you know? I've told the bloke that. Just remind us again, Darren. Did you tell him that that amount was actually going to be there? Yeah, I told him the amount because he actually said, well, we won't nick them straight off. We'll let it escalate, you know? They throw all their profit into buying more. He said, we'll let it escalate, we'll get a decent amount. And I said, fair enough, he knew the amount. Because when I was speaking to them in conversation before they went away, Mick said to me, well, we won't be messing about this time, he said. We've sorted it out this time. I'm going to have 160 kilos. And I went, phew, that's a lot of drugs. And he went, yeah, got to do it. He said, the next time we're going to go back, we're going to have double the lot. Like, you know, throw the money in, make double. We're going to make some money. I went, oh, yeah. And I told DC Bird. I said there'll be 160 kilos this time. Okay, now when we move forward in this particular police interview, we then get to this very interesting stage where we get some new information regarding individuals from Braintree and people in particular who DC Bird was interested in. Now, this is going to become very relevant as we move forward, but this is going to be brand new information, and take a listen to what is stated in this interview here. DC Brown says, and have you been asked by DC Bird about any other people? And Nicholls replies, yes, he asked me if I could dig the dirt on some bloke he particularly hates. Really would love to nick him. The bloke runs Tyre Tech in Braintree. It's a tyre place called Tyre Tech. So keep this in mind. We've now got a tyre fitters introduced into this story. DC Brown says, do you remember the name, Darren? And Nicholls replies, Mark something. I mean, there's only one Tyre Tech. It wouldn't be the hardest thing to find out. DC Brown replies, right, yeah. Nicholls then says, and he's also had a first for knowledge about Tony Ellis and Chris Pond, Tracy Pond. DC Brown replies, Tony Ellis, Chris Pond. Nicholls replies, Tracy Pond. They're both blokes. Tracy is a bloke. DC Brown replies, yes. Nicholls then says, Wingnut. I can't think of his real name, just call him Wingnut. I reckon anyone in Braintree would be able to tell you his name. DC Brown replies, yeah, and these are all from Braintree, are they, Darren? Nicholls replies, these people are all from Braintree, yeah. Now, pay attention to what Darren Nicholls states next. This point is really important. Darren Nicholls then says, yeah, these people are all from Braintree. Them four particular people are actually linked, because them four people are the main sellers, or as far as I'm aware, the only sellers of amphetamine sulfate in the area. So you've got potentially here a tyre fitters, which is, or I should say drug dealers possibly, masquerading as tyre fitters. Again, pure speculation, it's just what Darren Nicholls is stating in this police interview here. But keep this in mind, they sell a lot of it. DC Bird wanted the information on like where it might be kept, all this sort of thing, and actually give him some information about them. I actually found something out and told him. So you've got these four individuals. You've got Tyre Tech in Braintree here, again according to Darren Nicholls, speculation. But you've got this tyre place that by all accounts is the main seller or the only seller in that area of amphetamine sulfate. And also remember what's happened before. We've got DC Bird talking about stealing Michael Steele's Jag. We're going to make 150,000. We've got Michael Steele who's missing part or all of his consignment just before they're arrested. Darren Nicholls believes it's DC Bird. He's gone over there and stolen the drugs. And now we have this talk about DC Bird wanting to find out where they store this amphetamine sulfate. Where do they store it? Where do they keep it? Darren Nicholls then goes on to say, I got the feeling from that he actually was more interested in finding out where it was kept so he could have it, rather than actually nicking them. So again, we've got multiple occasions here, or multiple examples of this DC Bird looking to steal other criminals' goods, whether that be money, whether that be product. This guy was relentless. He was looking at every opportunity he could find to rip off and steal from other criminals. Again, we're talking about a then serving detective. Not low level, not some sort of person who's just passing out the odd couple of notes for a bit of information. This guy was looking to steal from other criminals. He wasn't that interested in actually arresting them. He was interested in stealing their product and then selling it on. And think about this. It would be a little bit short-sighted to just believe that Darren Nicholls was DC Bird's only informant. This guy would have had connections with other criminals in that area. Probably bigger criminals than just Darren Nicholls. Hopefully we're forming a bit of a picture here. But also interestingly, just as a side note to this, the talk of this Tyre Tech, the talk of this place being some sort of front for this amphetamine sulfate. Now, this is probably unrelated, but it's interesting in terms of the connection between Tucker, Tate and Rolfe and this Basildon Tyre Company. As I say, going slightly off topic here, but think about this. You've got Tyre Tech, who by all accounts, according to Darren Nicholls, and again, we're only going by Darren Nicholls' word here. I'm not saying that this is, absolute truth or the absolute facts of the case. But according to Darren Nicholls, Tyre Tech was selling amphetamine sulfate, right? So they're a front in some ways, I guess you could say, or they're involved in criminality, let's put it that way, according again to Darren Nicholls. But when you look at Basildon Tyre Services, and you look at how many calls there were between Tucker, Tate and Rolfe and Basildon Tyre Services in the lead up to Tucker, Tate and Rolfe's death, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What was their relationship? Was this just a case of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe taking their girlfriends' cars to Basildon Tyres to get them fixed and this, that and the other? Or was there something else going on there? There's 12 calls between Tucker, Tate and Rolfe and Basildon Tyre Services in the 48 hours leading up to their murders. Tucker's landline to Basildon Tyres, Tucker's mobile. And then we go down further. The 5th of the 12th, the day before they're killed, Basildon Tyre Services to Tate's mobile and to Sarah Saunders. Tate's landline to the tyre company, 1736. 11:43, Tucker's mobile to the tyre company. Tate's mobile to the tyre company. the tyre company to Tony Tucker? Again, pure speculation here, but could there be some kind of link? You've got Tyre Tech, according to Darren Nicholls, who's supplying amphetamine sulfate. You've got Basildon Tyres, who have 12 calls between Tucker, Tate and Rolfe in the 48 hours or so leading up to their murders. Just a thought. Anyway, let's continue. So as we move forward in this particular police interview, we have some further Darren Nicholls waffle. But I want to go through this because it really does demonstrate the level of connection here between Darren Nicholls and this DC Bird. Now, Darren Nicholls goes on to state the following. Because he was really interested in finding out where they might keep it. Again, talking about DC Bird. Do you know what I mean? I actually give him some information because I observed it. I'm sure it's Tony Ellis. It may not be Tony Ellis, but it's an Ellis anyway. I told him the registration because they all live near me. And you know, you always see these people thinking they're being clever, parking their cars outside my house to walk around to the whiz dealer's house, which is about 150 yards away. It's not Tony Ellis. It is an Ellis. I don't know what his first name is. I do know his first name. I'm just confused. DC Brown replies, yeah. I've told him registrations of his cars, his BMWs, because he's always seemed to enjoy buying quite late BMWs. I've told him when I've walked round the shop, I've seen where they go. I've told him that I've seen them walking into a particular row of garages and coming out the same row of garages. And why particularly walk your dog down a row of garages when there was a perfectly good part, like the same distance away as the garage, you know? And I've told him all this, and he's like, yep, you know? He pulled a list of garage owners' names and was going to show it to me because he said, well, I can't see anyone on the garage list that could be the garage worth doing to find out if that's where they keep the amphetamine. So I said, all right, show me the list, I said, because loads of them they've all split up from their wives, they've got girlfriends, lovers and all sorts. And I said, it wouldn't be very hard to talk a girlfriend into renting a garage from her council. I'd recognise her name, I could point it out to you. I gave him a big list of people that he should look for on this garage list. And he said, no, it's none of them. Okay, so again here, just look at the extent to which these two individuals were trying to find this amphetamine. You know, they're looking at private garages here, a row of garages, residential garages. DC Bird has managed to pull up a list of who owns which garage, and they're going to go through the names and find out which ones are the best to try and look into to see if that's where they store the amphetamine. This isn't just some pie-in-the-sky idea. This is quite clearly two individuals working closely together in order to rob other criminals. Rob, deceive, steal, whatever you want to call it. Rob other dealers, other criminals. And then as we move forward in the police interview, it then states the following. He hated that bloke from Tyre Tech, Mark something. He said he had this big thing about him. And then DC Winston says, what does he do then? Nicholls replies, second-hand tyres, Tyre Tech. And then Nicholls says they sell second-hand tyres. And then DC Winston says, does he do drugs? And then Nicholls says, it was counterfeit money actually, I think. The bloke was a criminal. So again, we're talking about Tyre Tech. The bloke was a criminal. He'd actually come out of prison and started his second-hand car place. I don't think he's... See, I had this dislike for the bloke as well, actually, because he'd actually been selling counterfeit money. And that's what I was put away for. And then he goes on to talk a little bit more about other bits and bobs. But as I say, it's just a rambling mess, to be perfectly honest. And then we get to the final point. This is the point which basically this whole video actually revolves around. And this is incredibly important. So then DC Brown, later in the interview, he then says to Darren Nicholls, so is there anything else with specific regard to DC Bird that springs to mind at the moment, Darren? And then Nicholls replies, Dead Pally with Ed and Adam. Ed and Adam, who the hell are they? Because we went to they call it a school dinners in a pub, which we had like a 3-course meal. It's served up by women wearing not a lot, basically. And then DC Brown says, school dinners in London. And Nicholls says, no, this was actually, these people, these like strippers type of thing, came to this pub, the White Hart in Sailing. And it was in their restaurant. And it was obviously full of blokes. And there was DC Bird sitting next to Adam. And one of the strippers was Ed's wife. That's why I said, you know, and he seemed extremely friendly with all the strippers, like, you know, talking about DC Bird again. DC Winston then says, so these are all local girls? And Nicholls says, these were local girls that were like, and then DC Winston says, who'd set that evening up? And Nicholls says, I don't know who'd set these strippers up, you see. And then it starts going on about what was happening at this particular restaurant. Adam was sitting right next to DC Bird. It was Adam. DC Bird, some others, Kevin Fire, who was like a wealthy git, and a few others on his table. Here we go. I was on a separate table. My governor had invited me. Like I was on my governor's table. My governor was the head of the table here. And this is where I fear the connection is. It's Darren Nicholls' boss and DC Bird. Now, we've been told, Darren Nicholls has told us on many, many occasions, that he was only introduced to DC Bird after the murders. Yet what do we have here at this pub? We've got DC Bird, who's friendly with all these strippers. We've got Darren Nicholls' boss, who's got his own table, and he's the head of the table. And interestingly, remember what we said at the beginning of this video, or near the start. When Darren Nicholls was asked the question, have you introduced Wolfie or have you introduced DC Bird to anyone else? What was his answer? He said no. The only person I've introduced him to is Colin. So that surely means that DC Bird knows Darren Nicholls' boss. Darren Nicholls, who's been working for this individual for some 16 or 18 months. That's the connection. Darren Nicholls' boss knew DC Bird, in my opinion. Now, where the hell does this take us? Where the hell does this take us? Darren Nicholls' boss is at this strippers do in this pub. And of course, Darren Nicholls doesn't say, oh yeah, I introduced my boss to DC Bird. He doesn't, because they already know each other. That's why Darren Nicholls' boss is head of the table. He's got his own table. He's aware of DC Bird. And this could suggest, I mean, I can't prove this, but this could suggest that there's a link here between DC Bird and Darren Nicholls prior to the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. Darren Nicholls' boss is with DC Bird. Now, this next part is actually quite hilarious. Bearing in mind, I've been making this video over the past 5 or 6 days. I've been recording audio on and off. And during that time, what nobody is aware of at this present time is that I had applied for 272 pages of the official case file concerning Michael Steele and Jack Wombs. These are public documents. They're held at the National Archives in London, and I paid around about £400 to get them digitised and sent to me. And you wouldn't believe it, but I received them about 2 or 3 hours ago. I was supposed to get them by December the 9th, and they've arrived this morning. And it would appear that it backs up everything that I have said in this video. Page 27, let's take a look. Mr. Trunley, and that's obviously Darren Nicholls' employer, Mr. Trunley employed Nicholls to do plumbing and other work for him contract by contract. The job in Sunbury involved Texas Instruments for about 3 weeks and started on December 6th. He left at 3 p.m. that day and Nicholls was still working. He had known DCA for about 15 years and they went shooting together. DCA, also known as DC Bird. There's the connection. Darren Nicholls' boss had known DC Bird for 15 years and they went shooting together, according to this document. So that's the connection, isn't it? That's how Darren Nicholls knows DC Bird. Yet Darren Nicholls, when he's arrested, or when it comes to court, he says, oh no, I've only been a police informant for a few months. I only knew DC Bird just before Christmas, but it was definitely after the murders. Yet his boss, who he's been working for the past 16 months, has known DC Bird for 15 years. Okay, so let's break down the connection here. We've got Darren Nicholls. We've got the corrupt officer DC Bird. We've got Darren Nicholls' then boss, Dave Trunley, and we've got Colin Bridge, the man who was then arrested at the time with the drugs in the back of the transit on the day that Darren Nicholls is arrested. So on the face of it, there is a connection here, you could say, between these four individuals: Darren Nicholls, DC Bird, Dave Trunley, and Colin Bridge. Now, in the trial points document, which was put out by the defence before the trial of Wombs and Steele, there's a very interesting paragraph, and it states the following. It is the appearance of Colin Bridge, who turns up at Jack Wombs' commercial premises driving a white Ford Escort van on the 6th of the 12th, 95, the day of the murders, which magnifies the importance of witness Kevin Tarbuck. So what I'm going to do for you now very quickly is take you through that particular statement. Take a listen to the following, and bearing in mind that it is the appearance of Colin Bridge, Nicholls' jockey, who turns up at Jack Wombs' commercial premises driving a white Ford Escort van on the 6th of the 12th, 95, which magnifies the importance of witness Kevin Tarbuck. Now, as I say, I've got no way of verifying this because I can't actually see it mentioned during the trial process itself. But the defence here for Wombs and Steele has raised the point. They've made a note of this on the trial points document, that Colin Bridge owns a Ford Escort van and he visits Jack Wombs' workplace on the day of the murders, a white Ford Escort van. Take a listen to the statement by Kevin Tarbuck. The following police statement is given by Kevin Tarbuck, dated the 14th of December 1995. I work for Sutcliffe Industrial Services Limited, who at present have a contract at Hanningfield Water Treatment Works. When I finish work, I leave the site and turn right onto the A130 towards Southend. I've been working on that site for about 5 weeks and have travelled along that road every evening during that period. At about 1940 hours on Wednesday the 6th of December 95, I finished work and started my journey home. As I approached Rettendon along the A130, I had just passed White House Farm on the left-hand side and was approaching a small lane, again on the left-hand side. As I got nearer to the lane, a white Ford Escort van emerged from the lane and turned left towards Rettendon in front of me. I only saw that it had one male person in it who was driving. The reason I remember this is that in pulling out in front of me, it caused me to brake. And because it was icy and snowing, I thought what an idiot he was. The vehicle then accelerated away from me. I followed, but by the time I had reached the Rettendon Turnpike roundabout, the van was nowhere to be seen. I would think the van was a D or E reg due to the style of the vehicle. I would not be able to identify the driver again. I would estimate the time that this happened would be about 1950 hours. At the time of the incident, it was dark and snowing. I had my windscreen wipers on and my headlights. In spite of these conditions, visibility was fairly good. There was no other vehicle immediately in front or behind me. If the van had waited for me to pass, he could have pulled out without affecting anybody. The vehicle was in my sight for about 15 seconds, and the nearest I was to it was about 30 yards. Okay, so here we have quite an interesting statement there by Kevin Tarbuck. He describes seeing a white Ford Escort van fleeing somewhere close to the crime scene on the evening that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were murdered. We have the trial points document, which discusses Colin Bridge attending Jack Wombs' workplace on the day of the murders, driving a similar type vehicle. Now again, I can't clarify or confirm 100% that this is exactly what happened, that Colin Bridge drove there in the Ford Escort van, because quite simply, this is just a document created by the defence. We don't know if Jack Wombs has said, oh yeah, well, you know, Colin turned up driving a white Ford Escort van. We don't know where this information has come from, so do bear that in mind. However, what I believe is important here is the location. Someone must have some prior knowledge or some link to White House Farm shooting ground. It can't be just a coincidence that they're killed on a Wednesday just after the normal time when the shooting would stop. To me, that's a coincidence too far. And take a listen to what is also mentioned in this particular document. Again, we're in the trial points document from the defence, where it states the following. No statement is ever taken from the close friend of DC Bird, namely Dave Trunley, who is the employer of Nicholls by the way of subcontracting. Trunley owns many shotguns and is a regular at clay pigeon shoots when they use the services of Nicholls as a chauffeur, as heavy drinking follows such meetings. Now again, I'm not creating this video to say Dave Trunley's the shooter or this, that and the other. But I mean, what are the chances here of Darren Nicholls' Passat being recovered by the police? They found gunpowder residue unconnected to the crime. That tells us they transport weapons in that vehicle at some stage. As I say, could that be taking people to and from shooting ranges or that sort of thing? Does that actually back up what's being stated here in the trial points document? It's a point worthy of mention, isn't it? But what are the chances of Darren Nicholls then becoming this getaway driver, this supergrass, when all along he may well have been a police informant? Think back to when Michael Steele went abroad. He went abroad on the boat. Darren Nicholls is already in Holland sorting out the goods. He puts the goods onto the boat. Steele comes back into the UK. And as he reaches the UK shoreline, the police are already waiting. Now, Michael Steele believed that the police had been tipped off. Is that possible? Was Darren Nicholls the person who tipped off the police? We just don't know, do we? We don't know how far this actually extends. We've got Darren Nicholls turning up at Tate's bedside after he was shot. He wasn't a particularly close friend of Pat Tate, yet when Tate shot, all of a sudden, Darren Nicholls appears. Was he sent there to get information? I mean, it would be, as I say, incredibly short-sighted to think that Darren Nicholls didn't know DC Bird prior to the murders. And how exactly does that change things? For me, it would be amazing, wouldn't it, if Darren Nicholls was DC Bird's only informant. DC Bird would have other connections. And I guess that's the key point here. What we don't know is how far those connections extend. Who else was DC Bird involved with? And does that have some bearing on the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe? Leave some of your thoughts down in the comments section below.